They didn't just break her bones. They tried to erase her existence. Imagine waking up one day and being forbidden from speaking your own name. Imagine an entire town, people you grew up with, looking right through you as if you were a ghost. For 10 years, she was known only as the Stray or It. She was the dirty secret of the Sterling Pack, kept alive only to serve. But secrets have a way of coming out, especially when the Alpha King walks into the room. Watch what happens when the most powerful wolf in the world looks at the lowest servant and whispers the one word that could burn the pack to the ground, her name. The rain in Washington State had a way of seeping into your marrow, chilling you from the inside out. For the figure kneeling on the cold grey tiles of the Alpha's manor, the cold was the only constant companion she had known for a decade. She scrubbed. The bristled brush bit into her red, chapped knuckles, the smell of ammonia stinging her eyes. "Mr. Spot, Stray," a voice sneered from above. She didn't flinch. She didn't look up. To look up was to challenge, and to challenge was to bleed. She simply shifted her weight, moving the brush to the imaginary smudge pointed out by Jessica Miller, the beta's daughter and the pack's reigning socialite. "I'm talking to you, It," Jessica snapped, kicking the bucket of grey water. The slosh soaked into the girl's oversized, threadbare grey t-shirt, the uniform of the unseen. "I apologize, Beta Jessica," the girl whispered. Her voice was rusty, unused. "Clean it up before the Alpha sees. He's already on edge," Jessica huffed, stepping over the mess with her designer heels, leaving muddy prints on the floor the girl had just spent an hour sanitizing. The girl grabbed a rag and began to sop up the water. She had a name once. She remembered the shape of it, the taste of it on her tongue. It started with a C, she thought, or maybe a K. It had been 10 years since anyone had spoken it. 10 years since the night the fire took the West Wing, took her parents, and left her as the orphan ward of Alpha Richard Sterling. Richard hadn't just demoted her, he had erased her. "She is the daughter of weakness," Richard had declared to the pack the day after the funeral. "Her bloodline failed us. To speak her name is to invite that failure back. From this day forward, she is nothing. She is nameless. She is the pack's burden." And just like that, at 12 years old, she ceased to be a person. She became Girl, Stray, Omega. It. She wrung out the rag, her hands shaking. She was 22 now. Under the grime and the oversized clothes intended to hide her figure, she was malnourished but wiry, her muscles honed by years of manual labor that would have broken a weaker wolf. She had no wolf of her own, or so they said. She had never shifted. The trauma of the fire, the pack doctor, Aris Thorne had claimed, had broken her beast. It made her safer, in a way. A wolf would have fought back. A wolf would have gotten her killed. "Hey, you!" The booming voice of Alpha Richard Sterling echoed through the hallway. The girl froze, making herself as small as possible. Richard was a massive man, built like a linebacker, with a face that had once been handsome before greed and whiskey bloated it. "Get out of the damn hallway," Richard roared, storming past with his beta Thomas Miller. "The delegation is arriving in 2 hours. Why is she still here?" "I'll move her to the kitchens, Alpha," Thomas said quickly, grabbing the girl by the back of her shirt and hauling her up. "Get out of sight, unless you want a night in the cellar." The cellar? The threat made her blood turn to ice. She scrambled, clutching her bucket, and bolted towards the service entrance. As she pushed through the swinging doors into the steamy chaos of the kitchen, she caught snippets of the conversation trailing behind her. "King Kieran isn't just doing a tour, Richard," Thomas was whispering, his voice tight with anxiety. "He's looking for the leak. The finances aren't adding up. And if he finds out about the off-book mining deals—" "He won't find out," Richard hissed. "We just need to keep him happy. Wine him, dine him, throw a few willing she-wolves his way. He's a man, isn't he? Valerius blood or not?" The girl slowed her pace just inside the kitchen. King Kieran Valerius, the Alpha King. Stories of him were terrifying. They said he was 7 feet tall in his human form, that his wolf was a midnight black beast the size of a bear. They said he had decimated the rogue armies in the south with nothing but a tactical squad of 5. He was known as the Justiciar. He didn't tolerate corruption. If he was coming here, Richard was terrified. "Move it, Stray!" the head cook, a stout woman named Martha, barked. "Don't just stand there gawking. We need 500 canapes prepped. And wash your hands. You smell like floor cleaner." The girl rushed to the sink, scrubbing her raw hands again. The water turned pink with blood from a cracked knuckle. As she chopped vegetables with mechanical precision, her mind wandered. She had heard rumors that the king could sense lies, that he could smell the truth. What if he sees me? She thought, a dangerous spark of hope igniting in her chest. What if he asks who I am? She almost laughed. If he asked, she wouldn't have an answer. She literally didn't know who she was anymore. "Here," Martha shoved a tray into her hands. "Take this to the ballroom. Place it on the back tables. Do not make eye contact. Do not speak. If anyone speaks to you, you bow and leave. Understood?" "Yes, Martha." The girl smoothed her grey tunic. She tucked a loose strand of mousy, unwashed hair behind her ear. She took a breath, lifted the heavy silver tray, and walked towards the lion's den. She didn't know it yet, but the girl with no name was about to walk into the rest of her life. The ballroom of the Sterling estate was designed to intimidate. High vaulted ceilings, chandeliers that cost more than the average pack member earned in a lifetime, and polished mahogany floors. Tonight, it was suffocating. Every member of the Sterling Pack's elite was there. The women wore silk and satin, dripping in jewels. The men wore tuxedos that strained against their muscular builds. But the atmosphere wasn't festive. It was tense. The girl moved like a shadow along the periphery of the room, placing trays of smoked salmon and caviar. She kept her head down, her eyes fixed on the floor. "I heard he's bringing the royal guard," a woman whispered near the buffet table. "The elite guard. They don't bring them for social calls." "Richard is sweating bullets," a man replied, chuckling nervously. "Did you see the security detail outside? Black SUVs. Government plates." The heavy oak doors at the end of the hall groaned open. The room went silent. Even the string quartet stopped playing. "Announcing," the herald's voice cracked slightly, "His Majesty, Alpha King Kieran Valerius, and the Royal Beta, Silas Vance." The girl froze. She was trapped behind a large ice sculpture of a wolf, unable to retreat to the kitchen without crossing the open floor. She made herself small, peeking through the gap between the sculpture and the wall. He walked in. The air in the room changed. It became heavier, charged with static electricity. Alpha King Kieran Valerius did not look like the monsters in the stories. He was worse. He was calm. He was tall. Yes, well over 6 feet. Broad-shouldered and lean, wearing a suit cut so sharply it could kill. He had dark hair, kept short, and a jawline that looked carved from granite. But it was his eyes that terrified the room. They were gold, not the muddy hazel of a shifted wolf, but bright, molten gold. He didn't smile. He didn't wave. He walked into the room like he owned the oxygen everyone else was breathing. Beside him, Richard Sterling looked like a sweaty, nervous child. "Your Majesty," Richard bowed low, too low. "Welcome to Sterling Manor. We are honored." "Skip the pleasantries, Richard." Kieran's voice was a low baritone that vibrated in the girl's chest, hiding behind the ice sculpture. "This is an audit, not a gala. I was clear about that." Of course," Richard stammered, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "But surely, after your long journey, a drink? Some food? We have prepared the finest." Kieran ignored him. He turned to his beta, Silas. "Get the files from their office. Now, I want to see the mining logs for the last 5 years. "On it," Silas said, moving efficiently towards the stairs. Kieran stood in the center of the room, his hands clasped behind his back. The pack members watched him, paralyzed. He began to pace, slowly, like a predator circling a herd. He stopped. He tilted his head, his nostrils flaring slightly. The girl behind the ice sculpture held her breath. Her heart hammered against her ribs so hard she thought it might crack them. He smells something. Kieran turned, slowly, deliberately. His golden eyes swept across the room, past the trembling dignitaries, past the table of expensive wines, and locked onto the corner where the ice sculpture stood. He frowned. "Richard," Kieran said, his voice dropping an octave, "why does your ballroom smell like distress?" Richard paled. I don't know what you mean, my king." "Everyone is happy to see you. Not fear," Kieran corrected, taking a step towards the buffet. "Despair. And—" He paused, inhaling deeply again. "Rosemary. And rain." The girl's scent. Despite the bleach and the grease, her natural scent was rosemary and rain. She hadn't known she had a scent. She thought she smelled only of cleaning supplies. Kieran took another step. Richard's eyes darted around, landing on the shadow behind the ice sculpture. His face contorted in panic. He signaled to Thomas Miller with a sharp jerk of his head. Thomas began to move towards the girl, his intent clear. Remove the problem before the king sees it. The girl saw Thomas coming. She knew that look. It was the look that preceded a beating. Panic, blind and primal, seized her. She dropped the silver tray. Clang! The sound was like a gunshot in the silent room. Every head turned. The girl gasped, scrambling to pick up the scattered appetizers, her hands shaking so violently she couldn't grip the metal. I'm sorry, she whispered, the mantra of her life spilling out. "You clumsy idiot," Thomas hissed, reaching her before anyone else. He grabbed her arm, his claws digging into her bicep, tearing the thin fabric of her shirt. "Get out, now!" He shoved her, hard. She stumbled backward, tripping over her own feet, and fell onto the polished floor in full view of the entire court. "Get her out of here!" Richard roared, abandoning all pretense of decorum. "Get that filth out of my sight!" Thomas raised his hand to strike her, to hurry her along. The girl flinched, curling into a ball, waiting for the blow. It never came. A growl ripped through the room. It wasn't a human sound. It was the sound of a tectonic plate shifting. It was the sound of death. "If you touch her," Kieran's voice thundered, echoing off the vaulted ceiling, "I will rip your arm from its socket." Silence. Absolute, terrified silence. Thomas froze, his hand raised in mid-air. He looked at the king, and what he saw made him wet himself. Kieran was no longer standing in the center of the room. He had moved with impossible speed. He was standing 5 feet away, his suit jacket straining as his muscles swelled, his eyes glowing so bright they looked like dual suns. "Step away," Kieran commanded. Thomas scrambled back, nearly falling over himself to get away from the girl. The girl lay on the floor, trembling. She stared at the king's polished shoes. She couldn't breathe. Kieran knelt. The movement was shocking. Kings didn't kneel. Not for anyone. Especially not for servants. "Look at me," he said. His voice had lost the thunder. It was soft now, urgent. She shook her head, tears leaking from her eyes. "I'm not allowed," she whispered. "I'm not allowed to look at the alphas." "I am commanding you," Kieran said, his hand hovering over hers but not touching, as if he were afraid he might break her. "Look at me." Slowly, painfully, she lifted her chin. Her grey eyes, wide and terrified, met his molten gold ones. The world stopped. The ballroom vanished. The cruelty of the last 10 years evaporated. There was a snap, like a rubber band breaking in the center of her chest, followed by a rush of warmth that flooded her freezing veins. Kieran inhaled sharply, his pupils dilating until his eyes were almost entirely black. "Mate," he whispered. The word hung in the air, heavy and undeniable. Richard Sterling let out a choked sound of disbelief. "Impossible! That thing? She's a nameless runt! She's defective!" Kieran didn't look away from her. He reached out, his large, warm hand cupping her cheek, thumb brushing away a smear of dirt. "Nameless?" Kieran repeated, and now his voice was cold again, a blade of ice directed at Richard. He looked back at the girl. He looked deep into her ice eyes, searching for something. "No," Kieran said firmly. "Not nameless." He stood up, pulling her with him. He didn't drag her. He supported her, his arm wrapping around her waist, pulling her flush against his solid frame. The heat radiating from him was intoxicating. He turned to face the room, to face Richard and the trembling pack. He held the girl like she was a crown jewel he had just recovered from the mud. "Who is she?" Kieran demanded. She's nobody," Richard stammered, sweat pouring down his face. "Just an orphan we took in. She doesn't have a name. We call her the Stray." "You stripped her of her name," Kieran said, connecting the dots. His anger was a physical weight in the room. "You made her a ghost." Kieran looked down at her. "Do you remember it? Your name?" She looked up at him, feeling safe for the first time in a decade, but her mind was a blank slate. "No," she whispered, ashamed. I don't remember." Kieran's jaw tightened. He looked at Richard. "You took everything from her, even herself." Then Kieran leaned down, his lips brushing the shell of her ear. The microphone on the podium nearby caught the sound, amplifying his whisper to the entire hall. "It doesn't matter what they took," Kieran said, "because I know who you are. The moon told me the moment I saw you." He straightened, addressing the room, his voice ringing with the authority of a king. "Her name," Kieran announced, "is Isla." The girl, Isla, gasped. The sound of it unlocked a door in her mind. Isla. Yes, that was it. That was her. "Isla," Kieran repeated, tasting the word. "And as of this moment, she is under the protection of the crown, and she is my queen." The silence that followed King Kieran's declaration was shattered by the clicking of heels on marble as the royal guard swarmed the room. They moved with military precision, flanking the king and his newfound mate, weapons drawn, not guns, but silver-edged blades that glinted under the chandeliers. Isla was still trembling against Kieran's chest. The heat of him was overwhelming, a stark contrast to the bone-deep chill she had lived with for years. She smelled sandalwood, expensive scotch, and the deep, earthy scent of a forest after a storm. It was the scent of safety. "We are leaving," Kieran announced, his voice brooking no argument. He swept Isla up into his arms, carrying her bridal style. She was light, far too light, and the realization made a muscle in his jaw jump. "But your Majesty," Richard Sterling sputtered, stepping forward, then recoiling as Kieran's head snapped toward him, a low, vibrating growl emanating from his chest. "Silas," Kieran barked, not looking away from Richard. "Seize the records, seize the assets, and put Sterling and his beta under house arrest until I decide their execution date." "Understood," Silas replied, his face grim. Kieran carried Isla out of the suffocating ballroom, through the grand foyer she had scrubbed just that morning, and into the cool night air. A convoy of black, armored SUVs waited on the gravel drive. A uniformed driver opened the back door of the lead vehicle, a massive, customized Cadillac Escalade. Kieran settled Isla onto the plush leather seats before climbing in beside her. As the door clicked shut, sealing them in a soundproof cocoon, Isla flinched. She scrambled to the far corner of the seat, curling her knees to her chest. She was waiting for the yelling. She was waiting to be told this was a cruel joke. Kieran didn't yell. He reached into a small refrigerator built into the console and pulled out a bottle of water and a protein bar. "Drink," he said softly. Isla stared at the bottle. I can't pay for that." Kieran looked as if she had stabbed him. He unscrewed the cap and held it out. "Everything I have is yours, Isla. You will never pay for anything again." She took the water with shaking hands, gulping it down so fast she choked. Kieran was there instantly, his hand rubbing soothing circles on her back. The touch sent electric shocks through her spine. "Why?" she whispered, wiping her mouth. "Why did you call me that? Isla. Because it is your name, Kieran said, his golden eyes scanning her face, cataloguing every bruise, every scar. I saw it in your mind when our eyes met. The bond. It pulls the truth to the surface. You buried it deep to survive. But it was there. He reached out, his fingers grazing the rough fabric of her grey tunic. And this ends now. The convoy sped toward a private airstrip on the outskirts of Seattle. Isla watched the trees blur past. The same trees that had been her prison walls were now witnessing her escape. Within an hour, they were boarding a Gulfstream G650. Isla had never seen a plane up close, let alone been inside one. The interior was cream leather and gold accents. She hesitated at the stairs, looking down at her muddy, oversized shoes. "I'll dirty the carpet," she murmured. Kieran didn't say a word. He simply bent down, untied her shoes, and slipped them off. Then he picked her up again, carrying her onto the jet in her socks. "The carpet can be replaced," he said, setting her down on a wide, reclining seat. "You cannot." As the jet taxied, a flight attendant, a beta woman with kind eyes named Sarah, approached with a warm towel and a first aid kit. "May I?" Sarah asked, gesturing to Isla's hands. Isla looked at Kieran for permission. "You don't need my permission," Kieran said gently. "But yes, let her heal you." As Sarah cleaned the cuts on Isla's knuckles, applying a stinging antiseptic, Kieran sat across from her, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. He was on his phone, barking orders in a low voice. "I want the best healer in the capital, ready when we land. Dr. Valenti, and get a stylist. No, not for a gala, for a wardrobe. Everything. She has nothing." Isla listened, feeling a strange detachment. It felt like a dream. Any moment now she would wake up on the cold tiles of the manor, with Jessica kicking her ribs. "Sleep," Kieran commanded softly, hanging up the phone. "I'm not allowed to sleep until the chores are done," she mumbled, her eyelids heavy. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a crushing exhaustion. Kieran moved then, unbuckling his seatbelt and kneeling beside her chair. He took her hand, interlacing his fingers with hers. His hand was massive, swallowing hers completely. "No more chores, Isla," he promised, pressing a kiss to her scarred knuckles. "The only job you have now is to exist. Sleep." And for the first time in 10 years, she did. The royal palace in the capital city of Lycaonia was not a house. It was a fortress of white stone, built into the side of a mountain, overlooking a valley that glittered with city lights. Isla woke up in a bed that was larger than the entire room she had lived in at the Sterling estate. The sheets were silk, cool against her skin. She sat up, panic flaring for a split second before the memories of the night before crashed into her. The king, the jet, the name. The door opened and Kieran walked in. He had changed out of his suit into dark jeans and a black t-shirt that clung to his chest. He looked less like a monarch and more like a warrior. He was holding a tray of food, pancakes, fruit, bacon, eggs. The smell made Isla's stomach roar. "Good morning," he said, setting the tray on her lap. "Eat." Isla didn't need to be told twice. She ate with a ferocity that embarrassed her, but Kieran didn't look disgusted. He looked satisfied. "Dr. Valenti will be here in an hour to do a full checkup," Kieran said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "And then we have to face the council." Isla froze, a piece of bacon halfway to her mouth. "The council?" "My advisors," Kieran explained, his face hardening slightly. "They will want to meet you. They will be curious." "They will hate me," Isla corrected, her voice small. I'm broken, Kieran. I have no wolf. I can't shift. A king needs a strong queen. I'm just a stray." Kieran's expression darkened. He leaned in, bracing his hands on either side of her hips, trapping her. "You are not broken. You are suppressed. I can feel your wolf, Isla. She is there, buried under layers of trauma and silver." "Silver?" We'll get to that, Kieran said grimly. But know this, you are my mate. That makes you the strongest woman in this kingdom by default. If anyone on the council disrespects you, they answer to me. The meeting with the council took place in the throne room later that afternoon. Isla had been scrubbed, polished, and dressed in a soft emerald green dress that brought out the flecks of colour in her grey eyes. Her hair, washed and brushed, fell in soft waves down her back. She looked beautiful, but she felt like an imposter. She walked in beside Kieran, his hand firmly on the small of her back. 12 men and women sat around a massive circular table. They were the alphas of the major regions. They radiated power. When Isla entered, 24 eyes fixed on her. Some were curious, some indifferent, but many were cold. So this is the girl, Lord Hideo, an elder alpha from the east, said. He didn't stand. The one from the Sterling kitchens. This is Queen Isla, Kieran corrected, his voice echoing off the stone walls. He guided Isla to the chair beside his at the head of the table. With all due respect, Your Majesty. A sharp-faced woman named Eleanor spoke up. She was the alpha of the Silver River pack. She has no scent of a wolf. She smells of humanity and faint distress. Is she even a shifter? She is, Kieran said. Her wolf is dormant. A dormant wolf? Hideo scoffed. A Luna without a wolf is a liability. The northern rogues are gathering at the border. We need strength, Kieran, not a charity case. Isla shrank in her chair. They were right. She didn't belong here. Kieran slammed his hand onto the table. The wood cracked. Careful, Hideo, Kieran snarled, his eyes flashing gold. You speak of your queen. I speak of the safety of the realm, Hideo shot back, standing up. Sterling is a traitor. Yes, we reviewed the files. He was embezzling, but he also claimed she was of failed blood. If she comes from a line of weaklings, she does not come from a line of weaklings. The voice didn't come from Kieran. It came from the doorway. Everyone turned. Standing there was Silas, holding a thick, dust-covered leather journal. He looked pale, shaken. What is this? Kieran asked. Silas walked into the room, placing the journal on the table. We raided Sterling's private safe an hour ago. We found this. It's the personal diary of Isla's father. Isla's heart stopped. My father? Silas looked at her with a mixture of awe and sorrow. Your father wasn't a nobody, Isla. And neither was your mother. Silas opened the book to a marked page. Your father was Lucian Thorne, and your mother was Seraphina Cross. A gasp went around the table. Even Hideo looked stunned. Thorne? Elena whispered. The Guardian of the West. But they died in a rogue attack 12 years ago. They were murdered, Silas said, his voice grim, by Richard Sterling. Isla felt the room spinning. I don't understand. Kieran took her hand, gripping it tight. Lucian Thorne was one of the most powerful warriors this kingdom ever saw. He was a true alpha. If you are his daughter, then she carries the blood of the ancients, Hideo finished, his arrogance replaced by shock. He looked at Isla with new eyes. Sterling didn't keep her as a servant because she was weak, Silas continued, turning to Isla. He kept you weak because he was terrified of you. He's been dosing your food with wolfsbane extract for 10 years. That's why you haven't shifted. He was keeping your wolf in a coma. The revelation hung in the air like smoke. Isla felt sick, the bitter taste in the porridge she was forced to eat every morning. It wasn't just bad cooking. It was poison. Kieran stood up, a terrifying calm settling over him. He poisoned her, Kieran said softly, for 10 years. Yes, Silas said, to stop her from taking her rightful place as the alpha of the Sterling lands. Kieran turned to the council. Prepare the interrogation room. I want Sterling brought here, tonight. He looked down at Isla, who was staring at her hands, tears streaming down her face. She wasn't a nobody. She wasn't a mistake. She was a stolen heir. And get Dr. Valenti, Kieran added. We need to flush the poison out of her system, because when her wolf wakes up... She's going to want blood. The detoxification process was agony. For 3 days, Ayla lay in the medical wing of the palace, sweating and shivering as the wolfsbane was purged from her blood. It felt like her veins were on fire. Kieran never left her side. He slept in a chair next to her bed, holding her hand through the seizures and the fever dreams. He wiped her brow, fed her ice chips, and whispered stories of her parents. Stories he had gathered from the older wolves who remembered them. "Your father was a giant," Kieran whispered one night as Ayla tossed and turned. "But your mother, she was the strategist. They say she could outthink any general. You have her eyes." On the 4th night, the fever broke. Ayla woke up. The room was dark, lit only by the moonlight streaming through the balcony doors. She felt different. Her senses were dialed up to 11. She could hear the heartbeat of the guard standing in the hallway outside. She could smell the pine trees on the mountain miles away. And she could feel a presence in the back of her mind, a low, rumbling consciousness that felt like a coiled spring. Ayla. The voice in her head was guttural, ancient, and furious. Ayla sat up. "Who are you?" "I am you," the voice growled. "I am the part of you they tried to kill." Ayla looked at her hands. Her fingernails were elongating, turning into sharp claws. Her vision shifted, colors becoming sharper, the night vision kicking in. The door to her room creaked open. Kieran was there instantly, waking from his light doze. "Isla?" he asked, sensing the shift in the air. "He's here," Ayla said. Her voice sounded different, deeper, layered with a growl. "Who?" "Sterling," Ayla snarled. "I can smell him." Kieran stiffened. "He's in the dungeon, 5 levels down. You shouldn't be able to smell him." Ayla swung her legs out of bed. She stood up, and for the first time in her life, she didn't feel small. She felt power surging through her muscles, knitting together the years of malnutrition and abuse. "I want to see him," she said. "Ayla, you're still recovering," I said. She turned to Kieran, her eyes flashing a brilliant, glowing violet. "The mark of the ancient bloodline. I want to see him." Kieran stared at her for a moment, stunned by the violet eyes. Then a slow, predatory smile spread across his face. "As you wish, my queen." Underscore, 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 underscore. The dungeon was cold and smelled of damp stone and fear. Richard Sterling sat in a cell, stripped of his fine suits, wearing a ragged prisoner's uniform. He looked older, deflated. When Kieran walked in, Richard scrambled to the bars. "Your Majesty, please! It was a misunderstanding. I was protecting the pack." "Save it," Kieran said, stepping aside. Ayla stepped into the light. Richard froze. He squinted at her. She wore a simple black tracksuit, but she carried herself like a war goddess. "Stray," Richard whispered. Ayla laughed. It was a dark, chilling sound. "You don't get to call me that anymore." She walked up to the bars. She could smell his fear. It smelled like sour milk. "You killed them," Ayla said. "My mother, my father. You burned them alive in their beds, and then you took me and turned me into a slave." I had to," Richard stammered. "Your father was going to merge our packs with the South. He was going to ruin our purity. I did it for the Sterling line." "You did it for greed," Ayla said. "And you kept me alive because you couldn't access the family vaults without my biometric signature. That's why you didn't kill me, isn't it? You were waiting until I turned 18 to force me to open the accounts." Richard went pale. "How? How do you know that?" "I remember," Ayla lied. She didn't remember. But her wolf did. The wolf knew things. Instincts were filling in the gaps. "Open the cell," Ayla commanded the guard. "Ayla," Kieran warned, stepping closer. "He is dangerous." "He is nothing," Ayla said. The guard looked at Kieran. Kieran nodded. The cell door buzzed and slid open. Richard backed into the corner. "Stay back. I am an alpha. I have rights." Ayla stepped inside. "You are a usurper." Richard, cornered and desperate, snarled. his body contorted, shifting into his wolf form, a large, reddish-brown beast. He lunged at her, jaws snapping. Kieran shouted, moving to intercept, but he wasn't fast enough. He didn't need to be. Isla didn't shift. She simply moved, faster than humanly possible. She sidestepped Richard's lunge, grabbed the fur at the scruff of his neck, and slammed him into the stone wall. The impact shook the dungeon. Richard whimpered, sliding to the floor, dazed. Isla leaned down, her eyes glowing violet, her claws extending. She placed a hand on his throat. "I could kill you right now," she whispered. "I could rip your throat out and end it." Richard's wolf whined, exposing his neck in submission. Isla stared at him. The rage in her chest was a consuming fire. She wanted to do it. She wanted to paint the walls with him. "Do it," her wolf urged. "He deserves it." But then she felt Kieran's hand on her shoulder, warm, grounding. "Isla," Kieran said softly. "He deserves death, but not by your hand, not like this. You are a queen. He is a criminal. Let the law finish him. Don't let his blood stain your soul. No." Isla trembled, the battle between her instinct and her humanity raging. Slowly, the violet glow in her eyes faded back to grey. Her claws retracted. She released Richard, letting him slump to the floor. "You're right," she said, standing up and brushing off her hands. "He isn't worth it." She turned to walk out, Kieran at her side. But Richard Sterling was not a man of honour. As Isla turned her back, he shifted back to human form, pulling a hidden shiv, made of sharpened bone, from his waistband. "Die, bitch!" he screamed, lunging at her back. "No!" Kieran roared. But before Kieran could move, a shadow detached itself from the ceiling. A blur of black motion. A massive black wolf landed between Isla and Richard. It wasn't Kieran. It was... another wolf? No. The black wolf snarled, snapping Richard's arm like a twig. Richard screamed, dropping the shiv. The black wolf turned to Isla, bowing low. Isla gasped. She recognized the wolf from her dreams. "That's..." Kieran stared, his eyes wide. "That's the spirit guardian of the Thorn line. It hasn't been seen in 100 years. The spirit wolf faded into mist, flowing into Isla's chest. She gasped, her back arching. "Isla!" Kieran grabbed her. "I'm okay," she breathed, looking at her hands. They were glowing faintly. I think I just got my inheritance." Richard Sterling's attack in the dungeon was his final mistake, but it wasn't the end of the danger. While Richard rotted in a maximum security cell awaiting public execution, the ripples of his corruption began to surface. Isla, now fully embracing her identity as the last Thorn, spent her days training. The spirit guardian she had absorbed gave her strength that rivaled even Kieran's. She learned to fight, to strategize, and to navigate the treacherous waters of court politics. But at night, she was still the girl who had been erased, seeking comfort in Kieran's arms. "You're doing it again," Kieran murmured one evening, pulling her close as they stood on the balcony overlooking the city. "Doing what?" "Thinking so loud I can hear it." He kissed her temple. "What is it?" "It's too easy," Isla said, frowning at the city lights. Richard was a coward, but he managed to hide a massive embezzlement scheme and the murder of 2 powerful alphas for a decade. He didn't do that alone. He's not that smart. Kieran's eyes narrowed. Silas has been tracing the money. It was being funneled into a shell company in the southern territories. The rogue lands, Isla realized. He was funding an army. Just then, the emergency sirens of the palace began to wail. A red light bathed the balcony. Silas burst onto the terrace, his face bloody. "Breach! We have a breach! The southern gate has fallen!" "How?" Kieran roared, already moving. "Someone let them in," Silas shouted over the sirens. "It's an inside job. We have mercenaries in the West Wing." The West Wing, where the council members were sleeping. "Go," Isla said, her eyes flashing violet. "Save the council. I'll hold the main hall." "No," Kieran grabbed her arm. "You stay with me." I am not a damsel, Kieran. Isla pulled away, her voice ringing with power. I am the queen, and this is my home. I will not let them take it. She didn't wait for his permission. She vaulted over the balcony railing, dropping 3 stories to the courtyard below. She landed in a crouch, the stone cracking beneath her feet. The courtyard was chaos. Rogue wolves, mercenaries with shaved fur and jagged scars, were swarming the guards. They were outnumbered. Isla stood up. She closed her eyes and reached for the spirit inside her. Wake up! A howl ripped from her throat. Not a human scream, but a primal command that shook the glass in the windows. She shifted. For the first time in her life, her bones rearranged, her skin reshaping into fur. It wasn't painful. It felt like coming home. She exploded into a massive wolf. She was not grey or brown. She was pure, blinding white, with violet eyes that glowed in the darkness. She was larger than the rogues, larger than any female wolf recorded in history. The rogues froze. The sight of a white wolf, a legend thought to be extinct, terrified them. Isla didn't hesitate. She launched herself into the fray. She was a blur of white fur and flashing teeth. She didn't fight with brute force. She fought with the precision of a dancer. She dodged, she weaved, she struck. Kieran, watching from the balcony for a split second before joining the fight, felt a surge of pride, so intense it nearly brought him to his knees. That's my mate. The battle raged for an hour. But with the king and the White Queen fighting side by side, the rogues didn't stand a chance. When the dust settled, the courtyard was silent, save for the groans of the defeated. Isla shifted back to human form, breathing hard, naked but unashamed in the dim light. Kieran was there instantly, wrapping his cloak around her. "We got the leader," Silas reported, dragging a man in a tactical vest forward. It was Lord Hidio's head of security. Isla walked up to the traitor. "Why?" The man spat blood. "Because Sterling promised us the throne. He said the king was weak. He said the girl was nothing." Isla looked at Kieran. They shared a look of grim understanding. "Take him away," Kieran ordered. He turned to Isla, wiping a smudge of dirt from her cheek. "You were magnificent." "I was terrified," Isla admitted, leaning into him. "Bravery isn't the absence of fear," Kieran said, quoting an old proverb. "It's acting in spite of it. You saved the kingdom tonight, Isla." 2 months had passed since the night the White Wolf howled in the courtyard, shattering the last remnants of the conspiracy that had plagued the kingdom. The seasons were turning, the harsh winter that had defined Isla's existence finally melting into a vibrant, hopeful spring. The capital was alive. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a coronation of a new era. Banners of gold and violet, the colors of House Valerius and the newly reinstated House Thorn, draped from every balcony, every lamppost, and every storefront in the city. The streets were packed with wolves from every pack in the alliance, from the high-born nobility of the Silver River to the rough-hewn miners of the Iron Mountains. They had all come to see her, the stray who became the savior. Inside the royal suite, the air was thick with the scent of lavender and nervous anticipation. Isla stood before a floor-to-length mirror, flanked by 3 attendants who adjusted the hem of her gown. It was a masterpiece of design, commissioned by Kieran himself. It wasn't just white. It was a pearlescent silk that seemed to glow from within, overlaid with intricate lace patterns that mimicked the winter frost, a nod to the cold she had survived. The bodice was structured, armored almost, reminding everyone that she was a warrior first and a bride second. "You look ethereal," Sarah, the flight attendant who had first bandaged her hands on the jet, whispered. She had been promoted to Isla's personal lady-in-waiting. Tears stood in her eyes. "If only your parents could see you." Isla reached up, touching the cool metal of the tiara resting on her brow. It was made of platinum, set with diamonds and deep, violet amethysts that matched her wolf's eyes. "They can," Isla said softly, her hand moving to her heart where the spirit of the Thorn Guardian rested. "They are here." A knock on the door interrupted the moment. It was Silas. The beta looked dashing in his dress blues, but his expression was soft. "It's time, Your Majesty," he said. "The king is waiting, and I believe I have the honor of walking you down the aisle." Isla smiled, taking his arm. "Thank you, Silas, for everything." The grand cathedral was a cavernous space of stone and stained glass, filled to capacity. As the heavy oak doors groaned open, a hush fell over the thousands of guests. The organ swelled, playing a melody that was both triumphant and haunting. Isla stepped into the nave. The walk was long, a path of red velvet that felt miles away from the dirty grey tiles of the Sterling kitchen. She saw faces in the crowd as she passed. She saw the council members, now bowing their heads in genuine respect rather than fear. She saw the delegation from the Sterling lands, led by the new Alpha, looking humble and grateful for the mercy the crown had shown their people. And in the back, tucked away in the shadows, she saw them, the ghosts of her past. Jessica Miller and a few of the old manor staff stood there. They weren't jeering now. They looked small, insignificant. Jessica met Isla's eyes and quickly looked down, shame burning her cheeks. Isla didn't feel anger. She didn't feel triumph. She felt nothing for them at all. They were just footnotes in a story that had moved on. Her gaze shifted forward, locking on to the only thing that mattered. Kieran stood at the altar. He wore the ceremonial military dress of the Alpha King, black breeches, high-polished boots, and a jacket heavy with gold braiding and medals. But he didn't look like a statue. He looked like a man who was holding his breath. His golden eyes were wide, unguarded, filled with a raw, consuming adoration that made Isla's knees weak. When she reached him, Silas placed her hand in Kieran's. The contact sent that familiar spark of electricity shooting up her arm, grounding her. "You took my breath away," Kieran whispered, leaning in so only she could hear. "I didn't think it was possible for you to be more beautiful." "I cleaned up well," she teased, her voice trembling slightly. "You always shone," he corrected, "even in the dust." The high priest, an ancient wolf with a beard like spun silver, raised his hands. The ceremony was old, older than the kingdom itself. It wasn't just words. It was a binding of souls. "We gather here, under the gaze of the moon goddess, to unite two bloodlines, two hearts, and two spirits," the priest intoned. "Kieran of House Valerius, Isla of House Thorn. You have faced fire and blood to stand here. Do you now pledge your lives to the service of the pack and to each other?" "I do," Kieran vowed, his voice ringing through the cathedral, steady and sure. "I do," Isla answered, her voice clear, shedding the last remnants of the girl who was forbidden to speak. "Then let the bond be sealed." Kieran turned to her. He didn't rush. He cupped her face in his large, warm hands, his thumbs stroking her cheekbones. He looked at her, not just as his queen, but as the woman who had survived hell to find him. He kissed her. It wasn't a chaste peck. It was a claim. It was passionate and deep, filled with promises of protection, loyalty, and a love that would burn longer than the stars. The crowd erupted. Cheers, howls, and applause shook the stained glass windows. Later that night, the celebration moved to the palace balcony. The city below was a sea of lanterns and fireworks. Isla stood at the railing, the cool night air playing with the loose strands of her hair. She felt the heavy warmth of Kieran's coat being draped over her shoulders. He wrapped his arms around her waist from behind, pulling her flush against his chest. She leaned back, resting her head on his shoulder, watching the colors explode in the sky. "What are you thinking?" Kieran asked, his chin resting on the top of her head. Isla touched the mating mark on her neck, a crescent moon that had appeared the moment they completed the bond. It throbbed rhythmically with his heartbeat. "I'm thinking about names," she said softly. "Oh?" "For 10 years I was it. I was stray. I was a ghost in my own life." Isla turned in his arms to face him. Her grey eyes searched his golden ones. You know, when I was in the kitchen, sometimes I would whisper my name to myself in the dark, just to make sure I still existed. But after a while, I stopped. I forgot. Kieran's expression tightened with old anger, but Isla smoothed the furrow between his brows with her thumb. "But then you walked in," she whispered, "and you didn't just see a servant. You saw me. You whispered my name when the whole world was screaming at me to be silent." "I would shout it until my lungs gave out," Kieran swore, grabbing her hand and pressing it to his chest, right over his beating heart. "Isla, my queen, my mate." "I like the sound of that," she smiled, tears pricking her eyes. Happy tears this time, but I like Isla best. Kieran smiled, the fierce, protective smile of the Alpha King. He leaned down, his lips brushing hers, then let them hear it. He turned her toward the crowd below and raised her hand high in the air. "Citizens of Lycaonia," Kieran roared, his voice amplified by the acoustics of the valley, "I present to you Queen Isla." The chant started as a ripple and became a tidal wave. Isla, Isla, Isla. It washed over the city, echoing off the mountains, a roar that banished the silence of the last decade forever. The girl who had been stripped of everything had finally claimed her crown. She was no longer a ghost. She was the name on everyone's lips. And as she looked at the king who had given her the world, she knew her story was just beginning. And that is the story of Isla and the Alpha King, from a nameless servant scrubbing floors to the White Wolf Queen who saved the kingdom. It's a reminder that no matter how much the world tries to beat you down, your true worth is written in your soul, waiting for the right moment and the right person to bring it out. I hope you enjoyed this roller coaster of romance, betrayal, and justice. If you did, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you haven't already, subscribe and hit the bell icon so you never miss a story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.